The small population of the Solomon Islands in the middle of a major geopolitical matchup. With national election results indicating a turn away from Beijing, China warns not to turn the archipelago into grounds for a superpower standoff. But with anti-Beijing lawmakers gaining support, how much will Honiara factor in to global divides? I'm Andrea Sanke, and today's Newsmaker is the Solomon Islands. In a far corner of the South Pacific lies the Solomon Islands archipelago, with well under 1 million people spread across almost 1,000 islands. It's a tiny population whose democracy has taken on huge international significance in the last 5 years. Caught between the interests of global superpowers, especially after Honiara cut ties with Taiwan in favor of China, all are watching the results of national elections unfold. So far, it seems the policies of pro-Beijing Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare have proven less popular than he hoped. Here's a look.
Vote counting continues in the Solomon Islands' critical elections, closely watched by China, the US and Australia. It's the country's first vote since strengthening ties with Beijing. And the early results have dealt a blow to Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare, who switched diplomatic relations from Taiwan to China and signed a security pact with Beijing. If re-elected, he's pledged to further deepen those ties.
Our party's approach will focus on strengthening relationship with China through a look north foreign policy, alongside continuing to nurture strong ties with our traditional partners such as Australia. We are committed to being friends to all and enemies to none.
Yet the US and Australia see the Chinese presence in the Solomon Islands as a threat to regional security. The opposition has also sounded the alarm. Two prominent China critics, Daniel Suani and the leader of the Solomon Islands Democratic Party, Matthew Wale, have retaken their seats in the election. Suani was ousted as the premier of the country's most populous province, Malaita, in a no-confidence vote last year after refusing to recognize China.
Yes, that is something that is very concerning, like the influence of the CCP in this country. Like, people are not really making decisions that comes from their own, the way they think about things. They've been influenced by money, goods and things, so that is something that we don't want to see in this country. And many people have been influenced through these things, and we wish we have a government that look very seriously about these things. Yeah.
The nation is one of the poorest countries in the region. In 2021, the economic woes and the government's pro-China policy sparked violent protests. Demonstrators stormed the Prime Minister's residence, breached the parliament, and burnt buildings in the capital's Chinatown district, demanding Sogavare's resignation. Now the people are demanding that the election brings change.
The change you want to see is our government putting our people first. That is one of the main important things we want to see. People first in everything that they do. In education, in health, as well as employment.
More than 300 candidates are contesting 50 seats in the parliament. More than 100 of them are running as independents, and they're traditionally crucial for the formation of the government. Once the MPs are elected, they'll begin negotiations to determine the new Prime Minister. These negotiations are not transparent and usually involve commercial deals and cash handouts. The incumbent Sogavare has been Prime Minister 4 times and is eyeing an unprecedented second consecutive term. But it will not be easy, with his main challengers also gaining seats. And whoever takes the reign will face challenges which will shape the future of the Solomon Islands as well as the Pacific region.
So how might the islands and the region shape up once results are clear? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are, from Honiara, Dorothy Wickham, the founder of the Melanesian News Network. From Beijing, Einar Tangen, a political and economic affairs commentator. And from Washington, Patricia O'Brien is an adjunct professor at the Asian Studies program at Georgetown University. Thanks all so much for being with me. You know, I'd first like to establish how much you all feel is really riding on this election. It's a tiny population, but a highly strategic location that really has the attention of Beijing and major Western capitals. Patricia, does it merit that attention?
This is a very critical election in terms of the direction of the Pacific and the interests, and also in terms of keeping the Pacific peaceful. It is a very important election.
Give me some more detail on that. What do you mean peaceful? Is there real conflict at risk?
I think there's been a lot of talk about escalating, military presence and so on. And I think that this election is really important for redirecting attention back to the most important issues, which is the well-being of the people of the Pacific. And the well-being of the people of the Pacific is not about an arms race and an escalation of an arms race. And so this is why commentators are hoping that the result will lead to a new government that is more looking at the welfare of its people rather than playing into the geopolitical chess game that's been escalating over the past few years.
Einar, would you agree there in that a lot really is at stake for the entire region on these islands?
No, I mean, this is an expression of democracy of this country. It's quite different from the US, it's quite different from China, it's quite different from the Middle East. They have the right to determine where they want to go. This idea that somehow, you're either on one side or the other side, either you're at the table or on the menu, as Patricia has kind of alluded to, is, I think, wrong. Yes, it is about the people, but it's not taking sides on this geopolitical issue. China has offered the Solomon Islands different aspects to help their economy. Those are large, and that's why you had him coming into power. Now you have people who are concerned because of the rhetoric coming from the United States, saying that China is somehow out to get you and that you're going to be part of some sort of geopolitical struggle. I think that's wrong. I think what we should really be doing, and I agree with Patricia on this point, is considering the welfare of the people. And that's not just talk. It has to be some sort of action. And, as we know with the Solomon Islands, they've had security issues, they've had economic issues, they certainly have climate issues. It's one of the lowest lying nations on Earth. They need attention. They didn't get it from Australia, and they certainly didn't get it before it became a strategic asset from the United States. Okay. So this idea about the welfare of the people is all about who's willing to help.
Well, let me get the perspective then from Honiara. Dorothy, is the welfare of the people of the Solomon Islands, has it fallen in the shadow of these larger geopolitical issues and this kind of struggle for somewhat military dominance in the South Pacific?
Absolutely. I think for the last 40 years since independence, I think the development assistance to this country has focused on various different areas that Australia, who is our biggest donor, so that was necessary to strengthen especially our governance systems. And then, of course, we had an ethnic crisis here in 2000, and then we had the regional assistance mission coming to the country and stayed here for nearly 15 years. But I think we must also understand now too, there is a younger generation voting now, and they see things differently. And I covered the last elections, and I deliberately went into one of the most remote islands of the country, which is in the Malaita Outer Islands. And I found that their issues were all about their welfare. These are islands that are being inundated with seawater. They had the lack of water. If there was a drought, they hardly had boats traveling to their country. So I think the three of us would agree that this election is more important about the people now. It's about us now.
Okay.
But of course, we're being overshadowed by the geopolitical issue. And it causes confusion for those, especially who live in a rural area, who have no idea about these issues.
I mean, Dorothy, you're talking about people in remote areas, but for the voters in Honiara, how much is the pro-West, pro-Beijing divide really on their minds? Are they voting in part out of support for Australia or China, or are they thinking about, like you said, who will spend more on healthcare or education or getting transport links to remote places?
I think that's basically what it is. People in Honiara are aware of it, but are not really clear on why it should be important. But they also want to have employment opportunities. They want to have a better hospital, and they want to have better schools for their children. And it's very expensive to educate kids in this country. So one of the campaign issues that the CARE coalition, which is Matthew Wale's group, had raised during its campaign, and I think that's what attracted a lot of people towards it this time around, is that they're offering to have free education for all Solomon Island children.
Fair enough, but let me ask Patricia then, you know, if we say that, okay, especially voters in remote areas, they are not thinking about these wider geopolitical issues. Maybe in Honiara they are more aware of it, but then how do you explain, you know, the riots we saw when ties were broken with Taiwan? I mean, this was a reaction, a huge reaction, that brought some real instability to the islands for some time. So is it being underestimated that people do care, maybe not on the larger geopolitical scale, but the specific relationship with what they got from Taiwan versus what they get with Beijing is an issue for them?
Yeah, I think that's definitely been something that we've seen. I mean, I defer to Dorothy on these, domestic questions, but I do think, you know, from where I'm sitting, that we've definitely seen with the switching of allegiance from Taiwan to China, that there was a significant pushback because there had been these relationships built and they were particularly strong in Malaita. And I think that there was very much the view that the local people were going to lose out on these very important human development projects that were making a real difference to people, and that the China approach was something different, and it wasn't going to address the issues in Malaita the same way. And so that discontent and that fear that the interests of the local people, particularly as Dorothy pointed out, the youth, that they were feeling left behind and left out of the equation, that's definitely been something that we've seen and manifesting in a very ugly way.
Einar, quickly, if you can explain, I mean, how Solomon Islanders would materially benefit from better relations with Beijing and why it does matter to the everyday lives of the people living there.
China has over 120 primary economic relations where they're the number one, exporter, importer, etc. China has manufactures more than the next 9 countries combined, as opposed to the U.S., which has a defense budget which is more than the next 9 countries combined. And Beijing is not offering ideology. They're simply saying we want to trade, we want a stable region. Obviously, politically, they want allegiance to the mainland as opposed to Taiwan. But there's nothing, despite all the things you hear, that is, China's trying to worm their way in. I saw a report that said that somehow Chinese warships and aircraft carriers are going to show up within the next 3 weeks in Solomon Islands. I mean, this is nonsense. This is kind of fear-mongering that you get from the United States, a country that's only been at peace for 11 years, who has the National Endowment for Democracy, which is also working in the Solomon Islands, and very active in terms of regime change and trying to shape countries in what they believe is the only course for them, ideologically, what the U.S. offers.
Okay. I mean, Dorothy, do you feel there's been fear-mongering in the Solomon Islands? I mean, do Solomon Islanders trust China Or is there a feeling of distrust that they are using the islands for military gain? And even, as I've heard some mention, the co-opting local politicians in the Solomon Islands.
I think there is a bit of fear mongering going on by especially the foreign media who come into the country and do stories there. As you know now, we have access to global news through the internet, unlike before we didn't have that. So there's access to that as well. But then you have to understand that I've noticed there's been a shift, a slight shift towards more acceptance of China now. And I think it's because when we first switched, there was this talk of them buying islands to build military bases, sending warships and all that other stuff that was going on at the time. And then it did not happen. And so now they're saying, so what was that all about? So there is a sense of, I think that for Solomon Islands, if you listen to what they're really saying, they're saying, we are not worried so much about our donors or our relationship with our donor partners. It is our leadership that needs to take control. I think that's where the issue is.
Dorothy, let me ask you about this, though. I saw some testimonies earlier about what certain Solomon Islanders had lost when Honiara cut ties with Taipei. And certain farmers, for example, were angry because they had been getting seeds, for example, from Taiwan, and they lost that. I mean, is that kind of testimony an anomaly, or do average people feel the loss of the relationship with Taiwan, or are they feeling more some kind of benefits from Beijing?
I think it'd be fair to say that if you're talking about a few people that lost maybe access to seeds, that would be very, very, very small number of people, to be honest with you. And also, if you're talking farms, a lot of our people who sell crops here for business purposes, say commercial farming, they're very small scale. You're talking about maybe a small patch near their house that they just sell goods for a couple of $100 a day. It's not. We are not talking commercial farms here.
Okay.
We didn't get to that point, and they tried to do rice farming here, but it did not suit the culture and the mindset of Solomon Islands. We don't do farming that way. We are subsistence farmers. So the habit is plant, walk away, come back to harvest, not be at it every day.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a culture thing that they had to get used to. And I think, I'm pretty sure somewhere along the line, if we really look at what's going on now, I think the problem was that government shifted its policy away from putting more help into areas like agriculture and health and education, and that's what caused the anger. But it's not so much because Taiwan pulled out and suddenly we're suffering and we're going hungry. That's not a true picture.
Okay, Dorothy, I'm going to stick with you because I need to ask, specifically about one of the candidates that looks to be gaining in the results of this election, and it's anti-Beijing candidate Daniel Suani. He's looking to win, or he has won re-election, it seems, in Malaita province, but he also lost a no-confidence vote last year. Explain his role then, because he is the antithesis, it seems, to the current prime minister, yet he is gaining popularity. What is that dynamic?
I think I listened very carefully to that reel that you played, and I think what he said, or what he intended to say, was that the concern is about Solomon Islands politicians and leaders allowing China to dictate to them or enforcing what they want on our politicians. That is the concern. Because Auki, his provincial town in Malaita, all the shops there are being run by Chinese, and they've been there for more than 30 years, nearly 40 years. So it's not an anti-China thing, so to speak. It's more the fear and the concern and the worry about our political leaders being used to, say, for example, bring in the CPP, ideas and policies into our country. And I don't really think the issue is so much China here. As a Solomon Islander, I feel very strongly about this. I need to say this. Because the reason I say this also is that if we blame China today, then who are we going to blame tomorrow? Australia? It's about us. We need to look at ourselves. We need to sort ourselves out, our leadership, sort out our economy, and then we'll be able to be strong and stable enough to have good relationships with our diplomatic partners.
I mean, let me come back to Patricia. I mean, you were saying it should be about the people, but that this is a hugely strategic election for geopolitical reasons. We have Australian and New Zealand police, actually, there right now in Honiara on standby in case there are problems arising from this election. I mean, do you think there's still that instability laying under the surface that we could see some kind of return to anti-China riots, or is that all in the past?
I think that the history of the Solomon Islands definitely indicates that this isn't something we can relegate to the past, and that's why they have security on the ground. But that's not unusual and exclusive to the Solomon Islands. I mean, if you just look at the neighbouring Papua New Guinea elections, they were very violent, and so there is a pattern of that happening in the region. So this is just a way of keeping calm and keeping the calm and so on. But I think that the reading of those riots of the past as being only about China. I mean, there was a whole lot of other. I mean, anything that when you get into the Solomon Islands, there's a whole lot as Dorothy alluded to before about the conflict and the presence of Ramsey, which was in the country till 2017. There's a strong history of providing security forces from outside. Okay. And that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're down to our last minutes. And Einar, we haven't even mentioned AUKUS, which was one of the reasons, the creation of that alliance was one of the reasons that it seemed China was trying to step up its presence and form better relationships with other South Pacific islands to kind of counter what it saw as, a threat, or at the very least, a menacing presence of a foreign military alliance in these waters. So what does China want to see as far as this election is concerned? Because AUKUS is a factor here, and China would like to have, as I said, better relations with its partners in the region.
Well, Andrea, that's one of the main misconceptions about Beijing, that they're somehow, like the U.S., saying you're either on my side or not. Democracies change, and how they vote. At least with China, they respect the sanctity of what countries do. We haven't always seen that in the U.S. The U.S. has brought in regime change 92 times since the end of the World War II. They're actively involved in 80 countries where they believe that those countries need assistance following the right path. And that's what I think you've heard a lot from Patricia. But, countries have to find their own way. China is not insisting that, if you don't go along with this, we'll attack you. But they are concerned about this kind of World War I mentality that the U.S. is expressing about bringing NATO into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, into Southeast Asia, into Asia, about AUKUS, about the Quad, about all of these alliances, about enhanced cooperation with Japan and South Korea against China. And it's always against it. But the question is why? Well, it comes down to simply, they fear China's economic rise. It's not military or anything else.
Okay. Let me finish then with Dorothy. Dorothy, do you think this election will help the Solomon Islands find its way, as Einar put it?
I think we've been trying to find our way for the last 40 years. I mean, it's a difficult thing for a country that we have 3 different ethnic groupings in this country with so many languages. It's not easy to hold us together as a country. But I think this election is paving way for the younger generation to have a voice now. I think that's what's important about this election.
Okay. Do you fear interference or influence of any sort, or do you think it's manageable?
I'm sure there will be interference and there will be influence coming from all different sides, you know. You'll have it coming in from the Americans, the Australians, the Chinese, even maybe the Japanese, who are very big donors in this country. But I think we have to remind ourselves all the time that what we need to focus on is ourselves, and to ensure that we look after ourselves first.
Okay, Dorothy, that will have to be the final word. For this edition of the Newsmakers, I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, as always, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sanke. We'll see you next time.